The alien mercenary discovered the real treasure, hidden between the human's legs. The collection contract, the maintenance tunnels beneath Kepler Station always smelled of recycled air and machine oil. But tonight, they carried something else. The distinctive scent of fear pheromones. Zara Voss pressed herself against the cold metal wall, her breathing controlled despite the rapid beating of her heart. 20 meters ahead, a figure moved through the shadows with inhuman grace. The alien operative thought he was hunting. He had no idea he'd already become prey. Zara had been tracking this particular visitor for 3 days, ever since the mysterious deaths of 2 human colonists had been ruled natural causes by station security. Natural causes didn't usually involve precise extraction of specific genetic material, and they certainly didn't leave behind trace amounts of Altarian nerve toxin. As the station's chief xenobiologist, she knew every species calling card, and this one screamed, professional, extraction. The figure paused at an intersection, his elongated head turning slowly as he scanned for threats. In the dim emergency lighting, his scaled skin shimmered with an oil-slick iridescence. A HFY, she confirmed, one of the galaxy's premier infiltrator species. Their natural camouflage abilities made them nearly invisible to most scanning equipment. But Zara had learned long ago that human intuition could detect what machines often missed. She waited until he committed to the left tunnel before following, her modified boots silent against the grated floor. The HFY was heading toward the human residential sector, specifically the area where new colonial recruits were housed. Fresh targets, young and healthy, exactly the profile of the previous victims. 3 days earlier, Zara had been approached by someone claiming to have information about the deaths. The meeting had been arranged through encrypted channels, the kind that usually meant someone wanted to stay very far off official records. She'd almost ignored it, but something about the urgency in the message had caught her attention. The contact turned out to be Kethmar, a Verdanian information broker with a reputation for knowing things that could topple governments. His insectoid features had been difficult to read, but the nervous clicking of his mandibles suggested genuine concern rather than his usual opportunistic greed. "Something is happening to your people, Dr. Voss," he'd said without preamble. "Multiple extraction operations across 17 systems, all targeting human males between the ages of 20 and 35. Someone is collecting your species' genetic material on an industrial scale. Why come to me?" Zara had asked. "This sounds like something for Earth Defense Command. Because official channels are compromised. 3 investigators have already disappeared, and their reports were buried. But you, Doctor, you have a reputation for solving problems outside normal parameters. And more importantly, you understand xenobiology better than anyone else on this station." The HFY ahead of her stopped at a ventilation grate that opened into a recruit dormitory. Zara watched him produce a small device, probably a neural dampener to ensure his victims remained unconscious during extraction. She couldn't let him complete his mission, but she also needed him alive for questioning. Moving with practiced precision, she drew her modified stunner, a weapon she'd personally calibrated to affect 17 different alien nervous systems. The HFY's scales began to shimmer as he activated his camouflage, but Zara had already marked his heat signature with her ocular implants. The moment he lifted the grate, she fired. The blue pulse caught him center mass, his camouflage failing, as his nervous system shut down. He collapsed backward, the dampener clattering across the floor. Zara approached carefully, binding his forearms with molecular restraints before he could recover. Up close, she could see the extraction kit attached to his belt. Military grade, expensive, and definitely not something a common criminal would possess. When the HFY finally stirred, he found himself in one of Zara's research labs, surrounded by containment fields and very far from any help. His yellow eyes darted around the room before settling on her with resigned professionalism. "Dr. Voss," he said, his voice carrying the distinctive harmonics of his species. "Your reputation precedes you." "Then you know I prefer directness," Zara replied, pulling up a chair. "Who hired you?" "Does it matter? There are dozens like me, hundreds perhaps, all with the same mission. You've delayed one collection. There will be others." Collection of what exactly? She held up the extraction kit. This is designed for harvesting reproductive material. Why? The HFY's thin lips curved in what might have been amusement. Your species is young, Doctor. Naive. You spread across the galaxy like wildfire, adapting to environments that would kill most others. Some find this concerning. Concerning enough to steal our genetic material? Not steal. Study. Understand. Perhaps neutralize. The word hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Zara felt her blood chill as the implications became clear. Someone wasn't just studying human biology. They were looking for a way to stop human expansion entirely. Who? She pressed. Who's behind this? The HFY was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with surprising candor. They call themselves the Hegemony Council, old species, established powers who see your kind as a threat to galactic stability. Your reproductive rate, your adaptability, your aggressive expansion, it frightens them. So they're developing what, a bioweapon? Something more elegant. A genetic modification that would reduce human fertility by 90% within 3 generations. Voluntary extinction, they call it. No violence, no war, just a gradual fade into history. Zara stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the station's central hub. Thousands of beings moved through the space below. Dozens of species, coexisting in relative harmony. The thought that some of them were actively working toward humanity's extinction made her skin crawl. Why tell me this? She asked without turning. Professional courtesy? Because I'm Silex, not just the HFY, he said with dignity. And because I've completed 17 extractions for them. I've seen their research facilities, their test subjects, what they're doing. It's not just about humans anymore. Zara turned back to face him. Explain. Your genetic material is more complex than they anticipated. The markers they're trying to isolate affect not just reproduction, but adaptation itself. If they succeed in modifying it, the weapon won't just work on humans. It could affect any species with similar genetic structures. A third of known sentient life could be at risk. And you're having a crisis of conscience now? Silex's scales shifted color, a sign of emotional distress in his species. I'm a professional extractor, not a genocide enabler. There's a difference between population control and extinction-level interference. Zara studied him carefully. Every instinct told her this could be a trap, but something in his body language suggested genuine concern. The HFY were merchants and mercenaries, not zealots. If Silex had realized the true scope of what he'd been contributing to, his desire to switch sides made sense. If I release you, she said slowly, what happens? I continue my mission, but the samples I deliver will be contaminated. Useless, for their purposes, but impossible to detect until it's too late. Buy you time to act. Or you could work with me directly, help me understand their operation from the inside. Silex considered this. That would mean abandoning my contracts, my reputation, everything I've built over 40 cycles. That's the price of redemption, Zara said simply. Your choice. The lab fell silent except for the hum of containment fields. Finally, Silex nodded. I know the location of their primary research facility. It's hidden in the Nexus Nebula, protected by energy fields that make scanning impossible. But I can get you in. Why should I trust you? Because, Dr. Voss, your species has something mine lost long ago. The ability to choose hope over fear. The hegemony fears you because you remind them of what they used to be before they became comfortable with stagnation. They've forgotten that evolution doesn't stop, it only slows. Your kind is proof that the galaxy can still surprise us. Zara made her decision. She disabled the containment field and handed Silex back his equipment, though she kept the extraction kit. We're going to need help. I have contacts in Earth defense, people I trust, but first we need proof. Solid evidence of what the hegemony is planning. I can provide that, Silex said, standing and stretching his forearms. But we'll need to move fast. My handler expects a check-in within 6 hours. After that, they'll know something's wrong. Then we'd better get started, Zara said, already pulling up star charts on her terminal. Tell me everything about this facility. The hidden network. The cargo bay of the independent freighter Dust Runner had seen better days, but Captain Marcus Webb wouldn't trade it for the newest Earth defense cruiser. His ship might look like scrap, but she could slip through hegemony, scanning nets like smoke through fingers, which was exactly what they needed for this operation. Zara stood at the tactical display, watching as Silex marked locations throughout the station. Each red dot represented a confirmed extraction site, and the pattern was becoming disturbingly clear. The hegemony's network had been operating under everyone's noses for months, maybe years. 47 active collectors just on Kepler Station, Silex said, his four hands working the holographic interface with practiced efficiency. Each one targeting specific genetic profiles. They're not random, Doctor. They're selecting for particular traits. Marcus leaned against the bulkhead, his weathered face grim. What kind of traits? Environmental adaptation, disease resistance, cognitive flexibility, Zara answered, cross-referencing the victim profiles she'd compiled. They're targeting humans who represent the peak of our evolutionary advantages. Makes sense, Marcus said. If you're going to build a weapon against a species, you need to understand their best defenses first. A soft chime from the communication panel interrupted them. Zara's contact in Earth Defense had finally responded. Commander Sarah Chen's face appeared on the screen, her expression carefully neutral despite the secure channel. Dr. Voss, I've reviewed your data, Chen said without preamble. We've had similar reports from 7 other sectors, but nothing this comprehensive. If your source is accurate— He's standing right here, Zara interrupted, gesturing to Silex. And we need immediate action. There's a transport scheduled to leave in 3 hours carrying 12 extracted samples. If we can intercept it— Negative, Chen cut her off. We can't take official action without concrete proof. The Hegemony Council includes 3 founding members of the Galactic Alliance. Accusing them of genocide without irrefutable evidence would destroy humanity's standing. Marcus snorted. Our standing won't matter much if we're extinct. Which is why I'm authorizing unofficial support, Chen continued. Captain Webb, your salvage license is temporarily expanded to include hazardous biological material. Dr. Voss, you're on extended research leave. Officially, Earth Defense knows nothing about your activities. Plausible deniability, Zara muttered. Politics as usual. Politics that keep us from starting a war we can't win, Chen replied sharply. Get me proof and I'll have a fleet at your disposal. Until then, you're on your own. The connection ended, leaving them in silence. Silex's scales had shifted to a deep purple indicating anxiety. 3 hours isn't much time to plan an interception. We don't need to intercept, Zara said, a plan forming in her mind. We need to follow. Let them lead us to the research facility. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That transport will have military escorts. We can't match them in a fight. We won't fight, Zara smiled. We'll hide. Silex, can you get us onto that transport? Nixhi's eyes widened. You want to stow away? On a hegemony vessel? Not stow away. You're going to deliver one more sample, me. The next 2 hours were a blur of preparation. Zara modified one of Silex's extraction containers to serve as a hibernation pod, complete with false bio readings, that would register as preserved genetic material. Marcus worked on the Dust Runner's stealth systems, preparing to shadow the transport at maximum range. They had one shot at this, and the margin for error was non-existent. The handoff point was a maintenance dock in the station's lower levels, far from security cameras and foot traffic. Silex approached with professional calm, wheeling the modified container behind him. 3 other collectors were already present, their samples loaded onto a sleek transport bearing diplomatic markings. You're late, one of them said, a Corthan whose crystalline form refracted the dim lighting into rainbow patterns. Complications with the extraction, Silex replied smoothly. The subject's immune system was more resistant than expected. The Corthan examined the container's readings with a handheld scanner. For a heart-stopping moment, Zara held her breath inside the pod, knowing that one anomaly in the readings would expose them. But Silex's modifications held, and the Corthan waved them through. As the container was loaded into the transport's cargo hold, Zara activated her subdermal communicator. "Package delivered," she whispered. "Beginning Phase 2. The journey to the research facility took 17 hours through hyperspace. Zara remained in hibernation mode. Her metabolism slowed to near death to avoid detection by the ship's internal sensors. Through her implants, she monitored the vessel's communication traffic, building a map of the hegemony's network with each transmission. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace, her sensors detected something massive ahead. The research facility wasn't just a station, it was a converted moon, its entire surface covered with laboratories and testing centers. The scope of the operation took her breath away. "Marcus, are you receiving this?" she transmitted on their quantum encrypted channel. "Holy hell," came the reply. "That thing's the size of Mars's moon. How did they hide something this big?" "Nebular interference and a lot of money," she answered. "I'm counting at least 60 docked vessels. This isn't just research. It's a full-scale production facility." The transport docked in a cargo bay larger than most stations. Through the container's sensors, Zara watched as dozens of similar pods were unloaded and sorted by robotic handlers. Her pod was designated for something called Laboratory 7, Advanced Synthesis. As the handling systems moved her deeper into the facility, she caught glimpses of the operation's true scope. Thousands of samples, not just human but from dozens of species, all being processed through automated systems. The hegemony wasn't just targeting humanity, they were cataloging the entire galaxy's genetic diversity. "Silex," she transmitted. "You were right. This is bigger than just humans." "I'm tracking your position," he replied from the dust runner. "You're approaching the main laboratory complex. Security increases significantly from there." Sure enough, her pod stopped at a checkpoint, where more sophisticated scanners began their examination. Zara triggered the pod's emergency release, knowing she had seconds before alarms started screaming. The lid burst open and she rolled out, her modified suit already adapting its surface to match the sterile white walls. Two hegemony technicians stood frozen in surprise. Zara didn't give them time to react. Her stunner dropped them both before they could trigger an alert. She dragged their unconscious forms behind a bank of equipment and accessed the nearest terminal with one of their credentials. The system's interface was unfamiliar, but the universal principles of database architecture applied. Within minutes, she was downloading terabytes of research data to her implanted storage drives. What she found made her blood run cold. The hegemony had isolated the specific genetic markers that gave humans their adaptability. More than that, they'd discovered how to weaponize it. The sterility plague was just the beginning. They had developed dozens of targeted bioweapons, each designed to eliminate specific human advantages. Some targeted cognitive function, others immune response, still others the ability to process certain proteins necessary for interstellar travel. But there was something else buried in the deeper files, a contingency plan labeled Final Protocol. If the targeted weapons failed, the hegemony was prepared to release a broad-spectrum pathogen that would affect not just humans, but any species with similar genetic structures. The casualty projections were in the billions. "Marcus, Silex anyone," she transmitted urgently. "They're not just trying to control human expansion. They're preparing for genocide on a galactic scale. We need to—" The lights suddenly shifted to emergency red. Alarms began wailing throughout the facility. Her intrusion had been detected. "Zara, get out of there." Marcus's voice crackled through the communicator. "Security forces are converging. On your position." She downloaded one last crucial file, the pathogen's molecular structure, before sprinting toward the nearest exit. The corridor ahead filled with armed hegemony guards, their weapons already charging. Zara dove behind a support column as energy bolts scorched the air where she'd been standing. "I need an extraction route," she called out, returning fire with her stunner. "Working on it," Silex replied. "There's a maintenance shaft 30 meters to your left. It leads to an external airlock." Zara spotted the shaft entrance, but reaching. It meant crossing open ground. The guards were advancing, their disciplined movements suggesting military training. She needed a distraction. Her fingers found the small charges she always carried for emergency situations. Not enough to cause serious damage, but sufficient to create chaos. She armed 3 and rolled them down the corridor in different directions. The explosions sent smoke and debris everywhere, triggering the facility's fire suppression systems. Through the chaos of foam and alarms, Zara sprinted for the maintenance shaft. Energy bolts sizzled past her as she dove into the opening, her suit's reactive armor absorbing a glancing hit that would have killed an unprotected human. The shaft was barely wide enough for her to crawl through, but it provided cover from pursuit. "I'm in the shaft," she reported, pulling herself forward as fast as possible. "What's the exit strategy?" "We're coming to you," Marcus replied. 60 seconds. Through the shaft's walls, she could hear security teams coordinating their search. They'd seal the external airlock soon, trapping her inside. She crawled faster, ignoring the protests from her bruised ribs and scraped palms. The airlock appeared ahead, its manual override panel glowing in the emergency lighting. She reached the airlock just as heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor beyond. The manual override required a security code she didn't have, but Zara had other options. Her suit's built-in plasma cutter made short work of the panel's casing, exposing the circuitry beneath. A few crossed wires later, the inner door cycled open. The airlock chamber was small, designed for maintenance robots rather than people. She squeezed inside and initiated the cycle sequence, knowing that opening the outer door would alert every security station in the facility. Through the porthole, she could see the dust runner approaching, its cargo bay already open. 20 seconds, Marcus announced. "We'll have one pass before their defense grid activates." The outer door opened to the vacuum of space. Zara's suit automatically sealed and activated its micro-thrusters. She had perhaps 10 seconds of fuel, enough for one directed push toward the dust runner. Behind her, the facility's defense turrets were already swiveling toward the approaching ship. She launched herself into the void just as the first defensive shots fired. The dust runner's shields flared under the barrage, but Marcus held his course. Zara hit the cargo bay deck hard, rolling, to absorb the impact. The bay doors slammed shut behind her as Marcus threw the ship into evasive maneuvers. "Hold on," he shouted over the intercom. "This is going to get bumpy." The human advantage, the conference room aboard Earth Defense Station Gibraltar, had never hosted such a diverse gathering. Representatives from 37 species sat around the curved table, their attention focused on the holographic display where Zara presented her findings. The data she'd stolen from the hegemony facility painted a picture of systematic preparation for genocide that transcended species boundaries. Commander Chen stood at the head of the table, her expression grave. "The evidence is undeniable. The Hegemony Council has been developing weapons capable of eliminating not just humanity, but 17 other species with similar genetic markers." "This is an act of war," growled Ambassador Thokvar, his Ursanian features twisted in anger. "My people share 40% of the targeted markers. We would be extinct within a generation." "Which is why we need a unified response," Zara interjected. "But military action alone won't solve this. The final protocol pathogen is already in production. If we attack directly, they might release it as a last resort." Silex, who had been granted provisional immunity for his cooperation, manipulated the display to show the pathogen's structure. "The weapon is elegant in its simplicity. It targets the very mechanisms that allow for genetic adaptation. Once infected, a species loses its ability to evolve, to respond to environmental changes. Death comes not immediately, but inevitably." "So, we're supposed to just let them continue?" demanded a Kelleran delegate, her feathers ruffling with agitation. "No," Zara said, pulling up a new set of data. "We use humanity's greatest advantage, our adaptability. I've been analyzing the pathogen's structure, and I found something the hegemony missed. Their weapon assumes genetic stability in its targets, but human DNA is anything but stable." She expanded the molecular diagram, highlighting specific sequences. "Our genetic code includes redundancies, backup systems that activate under stress. It's what allowed us to survive on Earth through ice ages, plagues, and radiation exposure. The hegemony's weapon would trigger these dormant sequences, not destroy them." Marcus, standing near the back of the room, spoke up. "You're saying we could survive their plague?" Not just survive. Adapt to it. Transform it. The pathogen uses a protein chain to deliver its payload. Human immune systems, when properly stimulated, could learn to recognize and neutralize that chain. More importantly, we could teach other species' immune systems to do the same. Chen leaned forward. You're proposing using humans as a biological shield for the entire galaxy? I'm proposing we turn their weapon into a vaccine, Zara clarified. If we can introduce a controlled version of the pathogen to human volunteers, let our bodies develop antibodies, we could synthesize a universal cure. The room erupted in discussion. The implications were staggering. Humanity, the species the hegemony feared most, could become the galaxy's salvation. It was poetic justice, of the highest order. The risk would be enormous, pointed out the Altarian representative. If your theory is wrong, you could doom your entire species. We're doomed anyway if we do nothing, Zara replied. At least this way we have a chance, and more importantly, we protect everyone else. Chen stood, silencing the room. I'll need to consult with Earth's government, but I believe they'll approve. The question is timing. How long before the hegemony realizes we have their data? They already know, Silex said quietly. My handler has been sending increasingly urgent messages. When I don't respond, they'll assume I've been compromised. We have perhaps 72 hours before they accelerate their timeline. Then we need to move fast, Zara said. I'll need a fully equipped laboratory and volunteers who understand the risks. We're essentially asking people to be infected with a potential extinction-level pathogen. You'll have both, Chen assured her. I'll put out the call immediately. Within 6 hours, Zara had her laboratory and more volunteers than she could process. The response from humanity's colonies had been overwhelming. When faced with extinction, people lined up to be part of the solution. She selected 30 candidates with diverse genetic backgrounds, each representing different aspects of human adaptability. The first phase involved exposing the volunteers to increasingly concentrated versions of the pathogen, carefully monitoring their biological responses. What she discovered exceeded her wildest hopes. Not only did human immune systems recognize the threat, they began developing countermeasures within hours. Look at this, she told Marcus, who had refused to leave despite not being a scientist. Subject 7's T-cells are actually dismantling the pathogen's protein chains and repurposing them. They're turning the weapon into raw materials for antibody production. Is that good? Marcus asked, squinting at the data he couldn't quite understand. It's miraculous. The human body isn't just defending, it's learning, adapting, teaching itself to be immune. And the antibodies being produced are compatible with most carbon-based life forms. By the 48-hour mark, they had their first successful vaccine candidate. Tests on tissue samples from other species showed promising results. The antibodies could be synthesized and mass-produced, providing protection against the hegemony's weapon. But time was running out. Intelligence reports indicated unusual activity at the hegemony facility. Ships were being loaded with what appeared to be dispersal devices. The final protocol was being prepared for deployment. We need to act now, Chen announced at an emergency meeting. The fleet is ready to assault the facility, but we need assurance that the vaccine works. Zara stood before the assembled leaders, a vial of the synthesized vaccine in her hand. There's only one way to be certain, she said, and before anyone could stop her, she injected herself with a full dose of the active pathogen. The room erupted in chaos, but Zara held up her hand for silence. I've already taken the vaccine. If I'm right, my body will neutralize the pathogen within minutes. If I'm wrong, she shrugged. Then humanity needs a better xenobiologist anyway. The next 10 minutes were the longest in human history. Medical scanners tracked the pathogen's progress through Zara's system, watching as it attempted to bond with her genetic markers. For a moment it seemed to be succeeding. Then, her antibodies struck back with coordinated precision, surrounding and dismantling the invasive proteins. It's working, the medical technician announced, barely containing his excitement. Complete neutralization in 7 minutes, 43 seconds. The relief in the room was palpable, but Zara wasn't done. We need to mass-produce the vaccine immediately and begin distribution. Every human colony, every allied world. The hegemony won't stop just because we've found a defense. What followed was the largest coordinated medical campaign in galactic history. Within 12 hours, vaccine distribution had begun across 300 worlds. The hegemony, realizing their plan had been exposed, attempted to accelerate deployment of their weapon, but found their facility surrounded by a coalition fleet. The standoff lasted 6 hours. The Hegemony Council, faced with evidence of their crimes broadcast across the galaxy and their weapon rendered useless, finally surrendered. The arrests that followed would reshape galactic politics for generations. In the aftermath, as Zara stood on the observation deck of Gibraltar Station, Silex approached her. His scales had taken on a golden hue, indicating deep respect among his people. "You could have let them release the weapon," he said. "Humanity would have survived while your competition was eliminated." Zara shook her head. "That's not who we are. Humans don't succeed by watching others fail. We succeed by lifting everyone up with us. It's not about being the only one standing. It's about making sure everyone gets to stand." The hegemony never understood that, Silex observed. "They saw your adaptability as a threat rather than a gift." "Adaptation isn't just biological," Zara replied, watching ships from dozens of species working together to dismantle the hegemony's weapon facilities. "It's social, cultural, philosophical. We adapt not just to survive, but to thrive together." Marcus joined them, a rare smile on his weathered face. "The councils voted to put humanity in charge of the new biological defense initiative. Seems saving the galaxy from extinction comes with some perks. It also comes with responsibility," Zara reminded him. The hegemony was wrong about the method, but they weren't entirely wrong about the concern. Humanity is expanding rapidly. We need to be mindful of our impact. "Agreed." Chen's voice came from behind them. She'd arrived quietly, still in her dress uniform from the council meeting, which is why we're proposing the Halifax Accords, limits on colonial expansion, mandatory genetic diversity preservation, and shared technology initiatives. We'll grow, but we'll grow responsibly. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The hegemony's attempt to destroy humanity had instead forced the galaxy to confront its fears and prejudices. In trying to eliminate human adaptability, they'd proven exactly why it was so valuable. 3 months later, Zara stood before a gathering of scientists from across the galaxy, presenting her findings on the vaccine development. The audience included former members of the hegemony's research team, who had been granted amnesty in exchange for their cooperation in undoing the damage they'd caused. "The lesson here isn't that humanity is superior," she said, her voice carrying across the auditorium. "It's that diversity is our strength. Every species brings unique capabilities to our galactic community. The hegemony's mistake was seeing difference as a threat rather than an opportunity." She pulled up a holographic display showing the genetic markers of various species. "Human adaptability allowed us to develop the vaccine, but Nix high camouflage proteins made it undetectable to the pathogen's defenses. Ursanian redundant organ systems provided the template for multi-stage antibody production. Kelleran rapid metabolism allowed us to speed up testing by a factor of 10. We survived not because one species was strong, but because all species working together are stronger. The treasure isn't in our differences. It's in our ability to unite those differences toward a common goal." The applause that followed was more than just appreciation for a speech well delivered. It was recognition of a fundamental shift in how the galaxy viewed itself. The age of isolation and suspicion was ending, replaced by an era of cooperation born from near disaster. Later, in the quiet of her new laboratory, now expanded to include researchers from 15 species, Zara reflected on how close they'd come to catastrophe. The hegemony had been right about one thing. Humanity did represent change. But change didn't have to mean destruction. Silex, who had become her deputy director, entered with a new batch of samples. The Corthan delegation sent these. They want to contribute to the Genetic Diversity Bank. every species volunteering their genetic material for preservation and study, Zara mused. A year ago, that would have been unthinkable. A year ago, we weren't facing extinction, Silex reminded her. Amazing how clarifying that can be. Through the laboratory window, Earth hung in the void, blue and green and perfect. But it was no longer humanity's only home. The stars beckoned, full of worlds to explore, species to meet, challenges to overcome, and humanity would meet them not as conquerors or rivals, but as partners in the grand experiment of life itself. The real treasure, Zara realized, had never been hidden between anyone's legs or in their genetic code. It had been in plain sight, all along, the ability to see potential where others saw threat, to find unity where others found division, and to adapt not just to survive, but to help others survive as well. The hegemony had tried to stop human expansion through fear and control. They'd failed because they'd fundamentally misunderstood what made humanity special. It wasn't their genetics or their adaptability or even their determination. It was their peculiar talent for turning enemies into allies, challenges into opportunities, and near disasters into the foundations for a better future. As the galaxy moved forward into this new era, one thing was certain. The treasure of humanity wasn't something that could be stolen, synthesized, or destroyed. It was something that could only be shared, and in sharing, multiplied beyond measure.